Welcome back. The FBI is investigating threats against the people who are with Nolan Wells in the hours before the Mississippi teen vanished and was found dead. Mississippi's Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindell said Wednesday that the FBI is investigating threats made against public officials, the people who were with Wells before he vanished, and their families.
This case has now done something most true crime stories never do. It has stopped being just a mystery and started becoming dangerous for real people right now. The FBI has confirmed it is investigating threats connected to Nolan Wells' death, and these are not vague, faceless online arguments. These are threats against a sitting judge's family, threats against Nolan's own friends, the same friends who were with him on Horn Island and have spent weeks trying to explain what they saw, threats against public officials working this case. One of Nolan's closest friends went on national television just to say something that should never need to be said out loud. We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. Meanwhile, the independent autopsy the family fought so hard to get has come back inconclusive, answering nothing, while the anger online keeps escalating anyway. And now the state's own governor has waded directly into this, accusing activists of stoking division, turning a grieving family's search for the truth into a genuine political flashpoint. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly who is being threatened, why federal investigators are now involved, and how a case built on unanswered questions somehow found a way to create real victims who had nothing to do with Nolan's death in the first place. Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel breaks down real documented cases using real sources, no speculation dressed up as fact. Subscribe to True Crime Revealed so you do not miss where this case goes next. Let us start with exactly what the FBI's involvement actually is, because this detail matters and it has been misunderstood in a lot of the online conversation surrounding it. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed directly to Locks that the FBI is assisting his office, specifically with examining digital evidence collected during the investigation. He was careful to clarify something important, that this kind of federal assistance is not out of the ordinary. Horn Island itself sits on federal land, and his office regularly works alongside the FBI for that reason alone, independent of anything unusual happening in this specific case. That context matters because federal involvement in a case can sound, to a casual observer, like a signal that something has dramatically escalated at the investigative level. In this instance, part of the FBI's role is simply routine, a natural extension of jurisdiction tied to where Nolan's body was actually found. But there is a second, separate reason the FBI has stepped into this case, and this is the part directly tied to today's update. According to a statement the FBI provided to ABC News, the agency is, in its own words, working to address interstate threats that were received by individuals related to this matter. That phrase, interstate threats, is a specific legal term, and it matters here. Threats that cross state lines, whether through phone calls, messages, or online platforms reaching people in different states, can fall under federal jurisdiction in a way that threats confined entirely within one state and one local community might not. This is why the FBI's role here is not a replacement for the local investigation into Nolan's death. It is a parallel federal response to a separate but connected problem, real threats being made against real people connected to this story. So who exactly has been targeted? Let us go through this carefully, because the range of people affected says something important about how far this situation has spiraled beyond the original tragedy itself. Nolan's friend, Tracestin Shepherd, spoke directly to Good Morning America's Aaron Katersky, describing threats he and others close to Nolan have received simply because of their connection to this story. His words deserve to be repeated in full, because they capture something that gets lost in most discussions of this case. "We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it," he said. "We all cared about and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see him die. Sit with that for a moment." This is a young man who lost his friend, who has already had to publicly relive the worst day of his life multiple times for investigators and reporters, now also having to defend himself against threats from strangers who were not there, who did not know Nolan, and who have decided, based on speculation alone, that punishment is owed to someone. Separately, Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashlee Cole shared a Facebook post describing waves of death threats directed at her and her own family. Judge Cole is connected to this case specifically as the stepmother of one of the 3 boys reported to have been on the boat with Nolan that day. This detail is worth sitting with, because it means these threats are not confined to a single person accused of wrongdoing. They have extended outward to a family member, someone whose only connection to this tragedy is a stepson who happened to be present that day, a young man who, as far as the public record shows, has not been charged with anything and is not, at this stage, formally accused of causing Nolan's death. Mississippi Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindell addressed this broader pattern directly during an interview on Mississippi Public Broadcasting's podcast, The Sit Down. He confirmed that threats have been made not just against witnesses, but against public officials and against Nolan's own family as well. Tindell was direct and unambiguous about how seriously his office is treating this. When you make those types of threats against public officials, against possible witnesses, and against the folks that are involved in this investigation and the family, then you are also committing a criminal act, and that's going to be taken very, very seriously, he said. That is not a vague warning. That is a senior law enforcement official stating plainly that people making these threats are themselves now committing crimes, separate and distinct from whatever happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island. Tindell also offered an explanation for why this has escalated the way it has, and it connects directly to something that has defined this case from its earliest days. He said false information circulating about Wells's death has incited what he described as rage and emotion, leading to a noticeably higher volume of calls coming into his office, some of which are, in his words, direct threats. This detail ties together two threads we have followed throughout this entire case: unverified claims spreading faster than confirmed facts, and a public deeply emotionally invested in a story involving an 18-year-old who should still be alive today. When those two things combine, speculation treated as certainty and genuine grief and anger with nowhere productive to go, the result, in this instance, has been real threats against real people. Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch also weighed in publicly, issuing her own warning specifically against attempts to intimidate investigators or interfere with the ongoing legal process. She stated her office would treat threats against law enforcement and prosecutors with the same seriousness Tindell described. Having both the state's top public safety official and its attorney general speak out on this within the same stretch of time tells you something about how seriously Mississippi's state government now views this specific dimension of the case, separate entirely from the question of how Nolan actually died. It is worth pausing here to clarify something the FBI's own statement addressed directly, because it prevents a common misunderstanding. The FBI's involvement in these threats does not mean the agency has taken over the underlying death investigation itself. State and local authorities, specifically the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, remain fully in charge of investigating what happened to Nolan. Federal officials are assisting only where their specific tools, jurisdiction, and legal authority over interstate threats actually apply. This distinction matters because it would be easy to assume federal involvement signals some kind of dramatic new phase in solving Nolan's death itself. What it actually signals is a recognition that this case has generated a separate, serious problem, one involving public safety for people who are, in many cases, simply witnesses trying to tell investigators what they remember. Now let us address the update that has added even more emotional weight to this moment: the results of the independent autopsy the family fought to obtain. According to a report from Dr. Roger Mitchell, president of the National Medical Association, the preliminary findings from Nolan's private autopsy came back inconclusive. His cause and manner of death remain officially undetermined, and the report indicates further investigation is required before any conclusion can be reached. This is worth stating plainly, because it may be disappointing to hear after everything this family has already been through. The independent autopsy, funded specifically by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick so the family could have results separate from anything connected to local authorities, has not delivered the clear answer so many people were hoping for. It has not confirmed foul play. It has not ruled out foul play. It has simply confirmed that, medically, there is not yet enough certainty to say definitively how Nolan died. This detail connects directly back to everything we just discussed about threats and misinformation, because an inconclusive result is precisely the kind of vacuum that speculation tends to rush in to fill. Investigators, for their part, have stated they believe Wells may have drowned, and say they have not found evidence of foul play at this stage. Nolan's family disagrees with that assessment and continues pursuing their own independent investigation, a disagreement that has now stretched on for weeks, without either side's position being definitively confirmed or ruled out by hard forensic evidence. In that gap between what officials believe and what the family continues to question, anger has clearly found somewhere to go, and in this case, that anger has, for some people, crossed directly into criminal threats against real individuals connected to this story. This brings us to the most politically charged development in this update, and one that deserves to be presented carefully, from multiple angles, rather than taking a side. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves has publicly entered this dispute, accusing what he described as nationally known activists of stoking division around this case. He did not name specific individuals in the reporting we have reviewed, but the implication was directed at figures who have become deeply involved in advocating publicly for Nolan's family throughout this story. This statement immediately added a distinctly political dimension to an already emotionally charged case, transforming a discussion about threats and an unresolved death into a broader argument about outside involvement, media attention, and who bears responsibility for how intensely this story has spread nationally. It is important to present both sides of this specific disagreement fairly. On one hand, the family's advocates would likely argue that sustained public attention and outside support have been essential in pushing for transparency, in funding an independent autopsy, in keeping pressure on investigators to communicate more consistently with a grieving family who has, by their own account, gone stretches with almost no direct contact from local law enforcement. On the other hand, the governor's underlying concern, that intense, sustained national attention on a single unresolved case can sometimes generate exactly the kind of emotional intensity that spills over into threats and harassment against private individuals, is not, on its own, an unreasonable point either. These two perspectives are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It is entirely possible for outside advocacy to serve a genuinely valuable purpose in pushing for accountability, while also, unintentionally, contributing to an environment where some individuals feel emboldened to cross the line into criminal threats against people who are simply witnesses or family members caught inside a story far bigger than themselves. Alongside all of this, the support network surrounding Nolan's family has continued to grow. Former NFL wide receiver Terrell Owens has joined Tyler Perry and Reverend Al Sharpton in offering reward money specifically for information that could help determine what actually happened to Nolan. This detail is worth including here because it illustrates the tension running through this entire update. On one hand, prominent public figures are actively trying to incentivize real, verified information coming forward, a constructive, good faith effort to help resolve unanswered questions. On the other hand, that same intensity of public involvement, reward money, celebrity attention, sustained national media coverage, is part of the exact environment Governor Reeves has pointed to when describing rising division and, implicitly, some of the anger that has spilled over into threats. So, stepping back, what does all of this actually tell us about where this case currently stands? It tells us that nearly 3 weeks after Nolan Wells' death, the central question, how did he actually die, remains officially unanswered, both by state investigators and by the family's own independent medical experts. It tells us that this unresolved uncertainty has created space for intense public emotion, some of it constructive, expressed through advocacy, reward money, and continued pressure for transparency, and some of it destructive, expressed through direct threats against witnesses, officials, and family members who bear no responsibility for whatever actually happened on Horn Island that day. It tells us that federal law enforcement has now become involved, not to solve Nolan's death directly, but to address a separate, serious problem this case has generated: real threats against real people, some of whom, like Judge Ashlee Cole's family, are connected to this story only through circumstances entirely outside their control. And it tells us that even the state's own political leadership has been pulled directly into public disagreement over how this case is being discussed, adding yet another layer of tension to a story that has already tested nearly every institution connected to it: local law enforcement, state government, national media, and now federal investigators as well. There is something worth naming plainly before we close this update. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He is gone, and his family is still waiting for a real, confirmed answer about why. In the meantime, people who knew him, people who loved him, people who happened to share a boat with him that day, and even a judge's family with only an indirect connection to the events themselves, are now living under the weight of threats they did nothing to invite. Whatever eventually gets determined about how Nolan Wells died, this much is already true and already documented. The uncertainty surrounding his death has produced real harm to real people who are not responsible for that uncertainty, and law enforcement at both the state and federal level has now made clear that this harm will be treated as its own serious criminal matter, separate from, but very much alongside, the search for the truth about what actually happened to Nolan. We will continue following this case as the FBI's investigation into these threats develops, as the official autopsy results are finally released, and as this family, along with everyone else connected to this story, continues waiting for the clarity that has so far remained just out of reach. We will bring you those developments the moment they are verified, and not before. That is everything we have for you on this update. If you believe the people connected to this case, witnesses, officials, and Nolan's own grieving family, deserve to be protected from this kind of harassment while the real investigation continues, make sure you are subscribed to True Crime Revealed so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a like if you think accountability should apply to threats just as seriously as it applies to unanswered questions. And share Nolan's name in the comments, because at the center of all of this noise is still one thing that should never get lost: a young man who deserved so much more time than he got. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next update.